was obviously 1,000,000% wrong when I said 1,000,000% right that you were that the evidence was there that you were not a dual citizen. Do you feel any sense of responsibility for the evidence that you put before the party and that you put before the public to give us a greater sense of confidence than clearly the reality was?
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And that was Sky's Paul Murray with Malcolm Roberts on Friday night, confessing he was 1,000,000% wrong when he made the bold claim 3 months ago that the now former One Nation senator would successfully defeat any High Court challenge.
So, tonight we are going to go through a series of documents that I have seen, that I have read, that are 1,000,000% correct, and I believe very clearly proves you aren't a dual citizen.
We ridiculed Murray's boast back then, and the fact that he and Roberts refused to show us the evidence. And last Friday, the full bench of the High Court tossed Roberts and 4 others out of Parliament because he was indeed a dual citizen at the time of his election. So, Murray asked, did the former senator take any responsibility for telling his party and the public he was in the clear?
Yes, it is my responsibility, Paul, no doubt about that whatsoever.
But while accepting the court's decision, Malcolm Roberts, who now plans to run in the Queensland state election, said he still reckons he was right to believe he was Dinky Di.
It was entirely natural for me to understand and believe that I was entirely Australian and only Australian.
Except he wasn't, and nor were the others, which is why we enjoyed this headline from our ABC colleagues.
High Court Citizenship Decision's main lesson, read the paperwork.
And the papers couldn't resist having a swipe either, especially at the accidental Kiwi, Barnaby Joyce.
Joyce wiped out.
Bye-bye, Barnaby.
And first to break the Barnaby news on TV was Seven's Mark Riley, who juggled a voice in each ear as he broadcast live from the court steps.
Excuse me, I'm not being rude here. I've just got a telephone to my ear because we're not allowed to broadcast them inside the High Court this afternoon, but our reporter Olivia Leeming is inside for us, so she'll be relaying information to me as it happens.
Channel 9 and the ABC broke the news about 20 seconds after Mark Riley. And how did 10 cover this major political story? Yep, with a rerun of the Bachelorette finale and Sophie's Choice. Seriously. We hope under new owners CBS, 10 will once again invest in news. But now to the other big political story of the week.
It was around 4:30 this afternoon when plainclothed AFP officers moved in on the Australian Workers' Union here in West Melbourne. We understand that this is a coordinated raid by federal police. They also targeted the union's building up in Sydney. Now, we're yet to see the officers emerge with any kind of evidence. They're in the building as we speak.
Now, we have those dramatic pictures because when police arrived at the Melbourne HQ of Bill Shorten's old union last Tuesday, the media was waiting for them. And as police piled into the AWU's Sydney office, the cameras were there as well, with Seven's Chris Reason, one of several TV reporters, on the spot.
On behalf of the ROC, the Registered Organisations Commission, it happened about 4:30 this afternoon. 8 to 10 police officers marched in here. The media had been given a tip-off. We were here waiting for them.
10 News was also there as the raids unfolded, with the drama perfectly timed for a live cross to the 5 o'clock bulletin.
Well, that's right, Sandra. Only a few moments ago, around a dozen officers from the Australian Federal Police arrived here at the headquarters of the Australian Workers' Union. They're armed with a search warrant and are currently going through financial documents upstairs.
The ABC did not arrive until after the police, but one of its Canberra reporters had the story online within 3 minutes of the raid. And next day on Sky, former New South Wales Labor Premier Christina Keneally stated the obvious.
That didn't just happen. That came from somewhere. That was a political act to tip off the media.
And before long, Labor was pointing the finger at Employment Minister Michaelia Cash, whose initial request had prompted the AWU investigation.
Cash's office tipped off media.
Cash denied it in a hurried meeting with the Prime Minister, and then fronted up to Senate estimates to deny it again, 5 times in all, before adding,
and quite frankly, I am offended on behalf of my staff as to those allegations. They are very serious allegations.
And that's where it would have rested had BuzzFeed's young political correspondent Alice Workman not spoiled the party.
BuzzFeed News has spoken to journalists who claim they received a phone call from Cash's office an hour before the raids to make sure there would be cameras outside the AWU offices in Melbourne and Sydney.
And with that revelation forcing Cash to tell the Senate she had known nothing, BuzzFeed's headline soon got this update.
and a staffer has now resigned.
For 7 hours, the senator's staffer had watched his boss mislead Parliament, but said nothing. So too had several in the media, who knew full well it was Cash's office that had given them the tip. So should they have revealed it? The Daily Telegraph's national political editor, Sharry Markson, the recipient of many a government leak, had no doubt the answer was no.
Shocking night for the media. Some journos clearly do not know how to protect sources.
And 2 other senior News Corp journalists backed her up, with Herald Sun Chief of Staff Paul Tatnell tweeting about betrayal, and the Advertiser's Andrew Huff adding,
"If I was journo who revealed source, I would feel ashamed and should resign from my profession. Utter disgrace."
And before long on Twitter, battle was raging, with former Fairfax journalist Margot Kingston replying just as forcefully.
Bloody hell, you think a photo op tip-off deserves protecting a lie to Parliament? Wow.
And The Guardian's Amy Remikus offering a similar riposte to Markson.
Sorry, but that's bullshit. Once the minister misled the committee, it was public interest.
With battle dividing on political lines, Peter Dutton and Ray Hadley agreed in their weekly radio chat how shocking it was the leaker had been outed. But it was not only the government or its supporters arguing that journalists must protect sources at all costs. With Seven's Robert Ovadia writing on Yahoo 7,
"There is no circumstance ever that justifies a journalist revealing their source, beyond preventing imminent criminality or protecting people's safety."
Well, we humbly beg to disagree. A lie was being told to Parliament, and some in the media knew it to be so. What's more, the leak was hardly whistleblowing. It was what the media call a drop. And as Imre Salazinski, press secretary to former New South Wales Premier Mike Baird, recently explained,
"A drop is neither more nor less than a confidential transaction between a government official and a third party, designed to benefit both. One gets an exclusive story that draws an audience, the other gets favourable news coverage."
Drops can also be political dirty tricks, and this looks remarkably like one, because the police were raiding the AWU on the orders of a new government body, the Registered Organisations Commission. And its first big investigation had been requested by none other than Senator Cash. And even Andrew Bolt, who's no fan of the unions or of Labor, thought this looked a bit off.
This commission was in fact set up by the government. It was in fact investigating Shorten on a referral from the government. And that makes this all look sus.
The offence the Commission is investigating is 11 years old and carries a mere $4,000 fine. And the potential crime? That Bill Shorten's old union gave $100,000 to Get Up, an organisation that shares many of its aims, and may not have properly documented the donation. Once again, even Andrew Bolt finds that a concern.
I have to say, this now seems part of a disturbing pattern of the Liberals under both Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull to use state power against a political enemy.
So, with that as background, and with the Minister misleading Parliament, is it really the media's duty to stay silent? The Guardian's Catherine Murphy thinks not.
This was not a cabinet leak, or someone blowing the whistle, or somebody telling you something in the public interest that someone else really doesn't want written. This was a person saying, get a camera down to the AWU offices in Sydney and Melbourne that he clearly believed would serve the government's interests.
And Sky's Samantha Maiden agreed.
Staffer is not exactly a whistleblower. Why should journos participate in a cover-up?
Maiden said later on Sky that she would not have outed her source, but would have urged him to correct the record. But today a number of senior press gallery journalists, Chris Uhlmann, Dennis Shanahan and Mark Riley, among others, have taken the traditional line in The Australian, with Riley also telling ABC's Insiders,
"You put bamboo under my fingernails, I will never, ever cough a source."
Luckily, it's not likely Riley will ever be put to that test. But is it the system or the public interest that journalists are trying to protect here? A couple of days ago, The Telegraph was berating critics who said it should not report on Barnaby Joyce's personal life and claiming
Politicians, and indeed certain members of the Canberra Press Gallery, believe the gallery's role is not to report, but to conceal.
And adding,
the Canberra Club believe this should remain in-house and not reach the broader public.
But surely with this story there was a far greater right to know. It was about dirty politics, media manipulation and misleading Parliament. And we believe there was a duty to the public to disclose the involvement of the Minister's office. And it's worth noting it was BuzzFeed, a relatively new member of the Canberra Press Gallery, that broke the story. But now to a far more scary subject, and the confessions of a homegrown terrorist, as revealed by news.com.au.
I established a terror movement in Australia, and I quit.
Wow, that is some scoop. So, who is this guy?
Shane Hunter established the far-left and violent Antifa movement in Australia.
What's more, he was radicalised in Sydney. But then came this even more extraordinary claim that the group he set up is
more dangerous than ISIS.
More dangerous than ISIS? So, what is this terror group? Well, news.com.au was talking about Antifa, or Anti-Fascist Action, which is a mishmash of hard-left groups that delights in disrupting right-wing rallies. But Antifa in Australia is perhaps most famous for attacking and being seen off by a light-footed Andrew Bolt. Their weapon of choice that day, shaving cream and glitter, which is all a far cry from ISIS, who are responsible for this year's London Bridge attack, the terrible truck tragedy in Nice, and the Bataclan shooting in Paris.
It was a scene of carnage. I'll spare you the details, but yes, bullets in heads, blood everywhere, dead people everywhere.
Not to mention gruesome beheadings. Indeed, ISIS has carried out terror attacks in at least 30 countries and killed thousands of people. So the comparison is absurd. But the craziness did not stop there, because the former terrorist also told news.com.au how he used to, quote,
speak louder on public transport so people could hear me speak, hoping they would hear my message.
Yes, really. So, did Shane Hunter in fact set up Antifa in Australia, as he claimed? No, say his former colleagues, who took to Facebook to brand him delusional and warn,
our advice to the media would be to apply even the smallest grain of salt when reporting on fantastical claims.
That, of course, was something news.com.au's freelance reporter Corinne Barraclough did not bother to do, perhaps because she's used to filing stories for Mark Latham's Outsiders. But we did, seeking comment from Antifa expert Dr. Troy Whitford, who told us the left-wing group was not on ASIO's terror list, and it was absurd to compare it with ISIS. Dr. Whitford also told us bluntly,
I haven't read anything so bizarre in mainstream media in a long time.
And we would have to agree. News.com.au told us in response,
the article was an opinion piece by Shane Hunter. As a former member of the Antifa movement, he believed it was more dangerous than ISIS and was entitled to that opinion.
Well, indeed, just as he's entitled to speak loudly on public transport. But now let's go to the top end, where Territorians who want to know what's going on turn to their corrugated Iron Man. Bushranger, or Bushie to his friends, is in the Sunday Territorian each week with the inside track on what's going on in Darwin. But this story from 8 days ago suggests his sources outside the Territory are not always so sharp.
There was a touch of irony in Victoria's euthanasia bill being supported by the Victorian Parliament this week. It was a Victorian who scuttled the Territory's laws. As a backbencher before his rise to Premier had begun, Daniel Andrews presented a private member's bill.
Well, yes, it was a Victorian and an Andrews, but it was the deeply conservative Kevin who once tried to stop the Northern Territory from adopting its own euthanasia law, and not the current Victorian Premier. And next day, the Territorian's sister paper confessed.
Wrong Andrews, mate. In a rare act of contrition, Sunday Territorian gossip columnist Bushranger has admitted mistaking the identity of former Howard government backbencher Kevin Andrews.
Oh no, so how did it happen?
After what appeared to be a big night on the booze, Bushie yesterday confused the former federal government euthanasia wowser with Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews.
Well, that's honesty for you, and good to know that at least some traditions of journalism are being upheld. And speaking of cock-ups, we need to acknowledge one of our own. Last week we said SBS was one of many media outlets who enjoyed a week-long high-flying Qantas junket to Seattle, all to cover the delivery of a new plane. But while SBS was offered the trip, it declined. Reporter Ricardo Gonçalves covered the maiden crossing, but from a not-so-luxurious airport hangar back here in Sydney. So, no more drink for me either. Sorry, we got it wrong. And you can read more about tonight's stories on our Facebook page or our website, and contact me or Media Watch on Twitter. And make sure not to miss Media Bites every Thursday. But for now, until next week, that's it from us. Goodbye.